So today we are going over one of my favorite sleights, the one-hand bottom palm. Now, as the name implies, this is a technique that allows you to palm one or multiple cards from the bottom of the deck, which not only makes it sort of mechanically interesting, but also quite different from other palms. Now, because this is a move that I didn't really want to teach on YouTube, but someone else already taught on YouTube, and the fact that it's a relatively advanced move, there's going to be a lot of discussions, a lot of sort of theory on this move throughout this video. Now, I would not be surprised if the idea of a bottom palm is very, very old. Now, as we've known, the classic palm itself actually dates back to 1740 in a book called Nouvelles Récréations Physiques et Mathématiques, which is French for new physical activities and mathematical activities sort of thing, along those lines, by Edmund Guyot, I think that's how you pronounce it. The idea of stealing a card from the bottom, I believe the first publication was actually in the form of a gambler's cop, which was actually in a book called Nouvelle Magie Blanche Dévoilée back in 1853 by Jean-Nicolas Poncin. So again, if we can infer from those two dates, so 1740 and 1853, we can probably infer that there might have been a bottom palm somewhere along those dates, but we just haven't discovered it yet because maybe it's an anonymous author or something along those lines. We don't really know, but that's just needless speculation. But I wouldn't be surprised if someone discovered, oh yeah, I can steal a card in the Gambler's Cop. Oh yeah, I can also steal a card in a Classic Palm. So I wouldn't be surprised if that existed. But again, that's just speculation. But Magic history has shown that the most random of sleights have been published in random books written by anonymous authors throughout history. So it's possible, but it's just random speculation. Now, to our knowledge, the first bottom palm that was actually published actually comes from a book called Kartenkunst. I think that's how you pronounce it, from 1910 by Johann Nepomuk Hofzinser, written by Ottokar Fischer. So that was actually used in an effect called synonymous hearts, first method. Now, if you think that doesn't really sound old, you'd be right, because that's not the full story. So Hofzinser's bottom palm is actually something that predates his death back in 1875. But why don't more people know about it? Well, that's because he actually burnt his notes. Yep. So Hofzinser actually burnt his notes, and he's like, all right, nobody will know what I know. And then he just called it a day. That's my career, that's my legacy, no one will know anything. But then, despite that, Ottokar Fischer was like, let me reprint that. So it took until 1910, so more than 20 years after his death, to publish his notes, which is why it took until 1910 for the bottom palm to actually be published. Now, the root of the one-hand bottom palm is largely going to stem from the same source as the one-handed top palm, which is Tricks with Cards back in 1889 by Professor Hoffman. So that's a move called to palm the bottom card of the pack. This method is of course associated with the one and only Jean-Eugène Robert Houdin. So I've discussed this technique over at the history section of the one-handed top palm, and it is quite bizarre, but I'll still go over it just briefly enough. So you're going to hold the deck face up in your hand like so. Face down, sorry. You're then going to put the entire deck into a classic palm position like so, which is a very bizarre position to be in. Your fingers are then going to squeeze the card closest to your palm, causing it to buckle. So essentially I just use my pinky to just drag it closer to my palm like so. I just buckle it into my palm like so. Okay. At the same time, because of this motion, this deck is actually just going to get squeezed out and ride on top of this palm card through pure friction, because there's a lack of friction, right? Versus your palm, which is sort of sticky-ish, I guess. So this deck is just going to ride on top of this card, and it's just going to get put at the fingertips like so. Okay? So it's just going to automatically shoot forward like so, and then it gets put into your fingertips, where you can then hand the deck out to be shuffled or whatever. Okay, so that is just the basic technique regarding the Jean-Eugène Robert Houdin move. So of course I went over it relatively fast because that's not the main purpose of this video. Now, the two bottom palms that I sort of want to focus on in the history section is, well, it comes from two sources. So the first one is Something Borrowed, Something New, back in 1941 by Paul Curry. So in there, there's actually a move called bottom palm. Now, a lot of people actually overlook this move, and they don't know that Paul Curry actually has a one-hand bottom palm because he just named it bottom palm. But the truth is, it's a one-handed bottom palm, but because it's just titled bottom palm, they're like, oh, it's probably a two-handed one, but that's not true. It's a one-handed one. So the interesting thing about this move is that it's actually quite similar to Ernest Earick's one-handed bottom palm. Some might even call it the precursor to the Ernest Earick one, except that apparently Ernest Earick independently came up with his. The one-handed bottom palm that most people actually refer to nowadays is, of course, the one that Ernest Earick actually does, right? So that comes from By Forces Unseen back in 1993 by Ernest Earick, written by Stephen Minch. So interestingly enough, this move does not have its own section in the book. It's actually included in an effect called Bureau d'échange. So here's an additional fun fact regarding the book, By Forces Unseen. So the only move in the book that has its own section is actually the longitudinal swivel steal. I don't know why I butchered longitudinal, but that's the only move in the book which has its own section. The other sections in the book are actually effects and routines. The longitudinal swivel steal is the only move in the book with its own section. So throughout this video, we'll be covering the Paul Curry handling as well as the Ernest Earick handling. So there is, of course, many other one-hand bottom palms. For example, Larry Jennings has one. So that's in The Classic Magic of Larry Jennings back in 1986 by Larry Jennings, which is very, very mechanically interesting, but horribly unoptimized. Like, it is, I don't know why. There's like the card has to rotate like this. It's so bizarre, but Alan Ackerman himself also has a move called the one-handed AB bottom palm, which was written in, I can't believe it's not all cards, back in 1997 by Alan Ackerman. And of course, that's just the surface for the world of one-handed bottom palms. And yeah, the rest is probably up to you to discover. But for now, I'm just going to present the one-handed bottom palm by Paul Curry and Ernest Earick. Now, if you're someone who only knows top palms, you have to wonder, what's the difference between a top palm and a bottom palm? Well, the obvious difference is with a top palm, you palm the top card of the deck. With a bottom palm, you palm the bottom cards of the deck. But I've actually grown to like bottom palms a lot more, and the reason is actually cover. When you do a top palm, right, the hand is on top of the deck. It's out in the open, right? So you have skinny fingers like me, like there's actually like windows in my hands just because like my fingers are hella bony, right? Or small hands, your dirty hand, right, is out in the open, and that's not something that you want, right? Now with a bottom palm, that's different. It's really different because your hand is beneath of the deck, which means that it actually means two different things. The angle of the hand is actually different, right? So when you palm cards on the top, your hand is actually arced over, right? It's actually arced over of the deck, which is fine, right? But with a bottom palm, your palming hand generally ends in this angle over here, which means that automatically your fingers are pointed towards the spectator's eyesight, which just means that you have the optimal palming angle already, right? Whereas with this, like, it's not the greatest because it's just the back of your hand. And again, like I said in the classic palm video, generally when you want to do a classic palm, it should be the knuckle of the middle finger. As long as it does not surpass the knuckle of the middle finger, your classic palm won't flash, right? But here, the entire back of the hand is flashing towards them, right? So there's a chance that angle-wise, it's not necessarily the best for a top palm, whereas the bottom palm, you automatically have an extremely good angle. The second reason is, of course, cover, right? So your palming hand isn't fully exposed, right? Unlike a top palm, the top palm, your palming hand is fully exposed, right? It's over the deck. Your the back of your hand is fully exposed towards the audience members, right? With a bottom palm, right, you have the deck on top of your palming hand, which means that you can spread it and you actually have more cover over the palm cards, right? So that's why I actually really like bottom palms, right? It's because of those two key differences. Now that we've compared bottom palms with top palms, we can now compare one-handed versus two-handed bottom palms. So generally, and again I say generally because this is a vast generalization, but for two-handed bottom palms, because you're using two hands, you can actually divide the workload. So pretend like for the Hobson's move, one hand can go backwards, one hand can go forwards, and that, as a result, actually lets you reduce the workload between both hands, which means efficiency-wise and speed-wise, I would say two-handed bottom palms would actually have the edge. On the other hand, two-handed bottom palms will also need a covering action. Because your two hands are together, you will need to find a reason as to why these two hands are together, because very rarely your two hands just go together, right, in a weird manner, right? Unless you're like cupping over like your wrist or whatever like that, or doing whatever, right? But generally, you will need to find a reason as to why your two hands are together. So you will need a covering action for a two-handed bottom palm, whether that be like a swing cut, squaring the deck, or whatever. With a one-handed bottom palm, you don't really need one because you only need one hand for the palm. Generally, for one-handed bottom palms, the general covering action is you drop your hand off to the side, and that's when you execute the move, right? So it's a very casual action, and it's really like it really doesn't need a covering action, unlike the two-handed bottom palm. So regardless of whether or not you want to learn like the one-handed one or two-handed bottom palms in particular, it's always nice to have some sort of diversity because, again, they both have their pros and cons, right? With two-handed bottom palms, right, you have the speed and efficiency. With one-handed bottom palms, you have the lack of a covering action. So again, both moves have their own sort of pros and cons. So here are just a couple of things that you should probably learn before you learn how to do a bottom palm, or one-hand bottom palm in particular, right? So the first thing is a pinky pull down. So obviously you should know how to get a break below the bottom couple of cards. So there are bottom palms where you don't have to count out the cards that you want to palm, but because this can also act as a multiple card palm, you will need to learn how to do the pinky pull down. So if you don't already know it, you should probably learn how to do that. The second thing they should learn is probably pinky stretches. So ideally, you should be able to bend your pinky without bending the other fingers, like so, okay? So I can just bend my pinky without bending my ring finger, my middle finger, right? So I can independently bend it, right? If you can't do that yet, I recommend that you stretch your pinky, all right? So there's a couple of stretches that sometimes I do, right? You can have your other hand come over, your thumb holds down the pinky, while the other fingers just holds back the other fingers. I just stretch it like so, all right? So before, when I was actually first learning this move, I actually used to stretch my fingers like constantly, even in class, right? So I would actually just bend my pinky and straighten on my other fingers, and would just push my pinky up against the desk. So pretend this was the desk. I would just push my pinky up against the desk while I was straightening out my fingers, okay? So I was just doing that in class while I was writing with my other hand, taking down notes and all that stuff. So I was on that grind back then, but so yeah, it's pretty stupid, but might as well make use of class time to learn two things at once, right? So that's also something I used to do, but again, like, you should probably learn how to independently bend your pinky first, and then learn the bottom palm will be much easier. So pinky stretches are something that you should know. Now the last thing that you should probably learn is a dealer's grip adjusted for palming. As I've mentioned before in the Guide to Playing Cards Grips video, generally when I palm with the deckhand, I need to make a slight adjustment to my dealer's grip. You're going to shift the deck forward, so then the bottom left corner of the deck is resting against the fat of your thumb. And this is so then it gives me a pivot point. okay? So the general sweet spot for the position of the deck is you have a card palmed, right? You release it from your palm, and then you rotate it up until you have a dealer's grip. And then you place the rest of the deck on top of it, like so, okay? And you'll also notice how high I'm actually holding this deck. That's because I actually want there to be space in between of the palm of the palm of my hand, as well as from the bottom of the deck. Because if there's not enough space, I can't bottom palm, right? So I want there to be this amount of space as well as this pivot point, okay? The only time that I actually have this deck actually close to my fingers is when I do a false deal. But we're not doing a false deal right now, so you really want this deck to be a bit higher up in your hand, okay? So close to your fingertips, like so, okay? So those are the three things that you should know before you start learning how to do this move. So the pinky pull down, pinky stretches, right? And then the dealer's grip adjusted for bottom palms or just palming in general, okay? So the general context behind this palm is that you're dropping your arm off to the side, and that's when you execute the move, okay? So that's the general context behind this move. So what you're going to do, and I'm going to demonstrate this move with the 4 aces, just so that it's easier to keep track of everything. So what we're going to do, you're going to get in the proper position. So you're going to get in a dealer's grip adjusted for palming, like so, okay? Next, you're going to get a pinky break above the cards that you want to bottom palm. So in this case, I do a pinky pull down, and I get a break above of the 4 aces, like so. Now, you're going to stick your pinky as deeply as possible into your break, okay? And you're going to continue until these cards actually start buckling, okay? So eventually it's just gonna hit the phalange of your pinky, like so, and you're just gonna continue until it buckles these cards, until it bends them into a U shape. This buckle is actually extremely important because it will serve 2 purposes. One, it forces the bottom left corner of the buckled cards against the fat of your thumb, which means that now these buckled cards can't move anywhere. It's forced to anchor itself to the fat of your thumb, so then now they have a pivot point. The second reason is that it will actually give space for the cards to clear your fingers. If you don't buckle them, these cards will actually just hit your fingers and they're going to be locked in place, okay? So I want them to be buckled to give them space to clear these cards, okay? So this buckle, this U shape, is extremely important, okay? So once you have that buckle in place, what you're going to do now is that you're actually just going to shift your index finger to the right long edge of the deck along with your other fingers, like so, okay? It's going to be close to the upper right corner of the deck. Also, here's an important thing to note is that your index finger doesn't have to wrap around the entirety of the right long edge, because I feel like if you wrap around the entirety of the right long edge, there's actually 2 problems that arise with that. So the first thing is that your index finger, one, is actually going to hug the bottom deck a bit too much, which will cause the bottom cards to actually just get stuck on it, which is not something that you want. So you can hold the deck actually closer to the bottom few cards instead, which will actually let the cards actually clear the index finger a lot more, right? So just having the tip of your index finger holding the bottom of the deck will be sufficient, okay? So you don't have to wrap your entire index around, okay? And like I said at the other part of the tutorial, right? If you're closer to the top right corner of the deck, it'll actually be easier for the buckled cards to actually clear the index, because now you don't have this entire chunk to move like around of the index, right? If you move it closer to the top right, you only have the smidget of a corner to bend and then move around of the index, okay? So if your index finger is closer to the top right corner, it'll be easier for these buckled cards to actually just move, okay? So those are the 2 tips if you're having trouble with the index finger actually not being able to clear with the buckled cards if they can't clear the index finger, okay? Now you're going to move your left thumb to the top of the deck where it just lays slightly above the center line of the deck over here. Okay? Now you're going to do two things at once. You're going to continue curling in your pinky almost as if you want the pinky tip to touch the palm, which causes these buckled cards to actually start rotating. Okay? So because of this buckle, so the initial problem that you might have is actually that these cards actually start hitting the index finger. If it actually starts hitting your index finger, you want to buckle these cards a bit more, and then you'll notice that now these cards can slip underneath of the index finger. Okay, so one problem is that, oh, it's hitting this, then you just buckle them until they can slip underneath of them. So you're gonna bend the hell of these cards, okay? So you're gonna buckle these cards and you're gonna pivot them with your pinky, like so. The second thing that you're gonna do is that you're gonna apply a slight bit of pressure onto the top of the deck with your left thumb, which causes the deck to lift up a little and be clipped in between of your thumb and the third phalange of your index finger. Okay? And once the top right corner of the buckled cards actually clears the pad of your index finger, you're going to relax these fingers, which allows them to sort of just extend a bit, right? So these fingers just extend a bit, and that allows this buckled card to actually these buckled cards to actually continue their path. So you continue rotating this packet with your pinky. So it's just continue to pull down on this packet over here, right? And you're going to continue pulling down on these cards and pivoting these cards until this packet over here is going to be in line with your index finger, like so. Okay. From there, it's going to be sort of interesting because you're going to do two things again, right? You're going to slowly release pressure on these cards with your pinky, causing them to strain out. At the same time, you're going to apply a bit of pressure with your index finger, causing these cards to actually buckle into your palm, like so. Okay? So it slowly releases pressure, and then you slowly apply pressure with your index. Okay? So it's sort of an exchange of pressure. You release, and then you apply, like so. Okay? And this all happens underneath of the deck. Okay? And this essentially puts the buckled cards into a modified classic palm. Your other fingers, which are still sort of scattered about, are going to move around, and they're just going to join the index finger along the top short edge of the card, and you're just going to apply a bit of pressure, and now you have the card in a modified bottom palm. Okay? So what's actually happening? I'll show you the move without the deck. So what's happening is you move your index finger, right? You buckle these cards until they can bend and their overall width is reduced, right? You're going to start pulling with your pinky, causing these cards to actually start rotating, like so. This top right corner clears the index, and this will be made easier because of the buckle, right? It starts rotating. You're going to relax your middle finger and your ring finger, giving these cards space to actually just rotate a bit more. It continues rotating until this left long edge is now in line with your index. You're going to apply some pressure with your index finger as you release pressure with your pinky finger, causing this card to actually just buckle inward into the palm of your hand, like so. These other fingers are just going to move around, and they're just going to apply pressure on the top short edge of the deck, putting this card into in a classic palm, like so. Okay, so this is what happens underneath of the deck. Okay, so that is the Paul Curry method of bottom palming the deck, the cards. Okay. So next, let's go over the one-hand bottom palm by Ernest Earick. Funnily enough, in Worlds Beyond back in 2001 by Paul Curry, which is a compilation of Paul Curry's work, there's actually a reference to Ernest Earick's one-hand bottom palm. So, quote, "The reader may be interested in studying a further development of Curry's bottom palm, described on page 86 of Minch's By Forces Unseen, The Innovative Magic of Ernest Earick, 1993. Unquote. So it's pretty interesting that they actually have a reference for Ernest Earick's bottom palm, and they actually name it a development of Paul Curry's bottom palm. But generally for the one-hand bottom palm, I actually don't really do it too differently from Ernest Earick. So what's actually going to happen is that you're going to move into your dealer script adjusted for palming. You're going to move your index finger to the top right corner of the deck. So it's just going to shift from here to here. Okay, and it doesn't have to wrap around the entire corner, right? Much like the Paul Curry bottom palm, it doesn't have to wrap around the entire deck, right? It just has to be around the bottom few cards, okay? Because the point of the index finger is just to stabilize the deck, right? It's not to hold the entire deck still as a block, okay? It just needs to stabilize it, and to also apply a bit of diagonal pressure from the top right corner of the deck to the bottom left corner. Right? So now if I release the deck with the rest of my fingers, right, I'm holding the deck just from the top right corner to the bottom left corner. So those are the two pressure points of the deck, okay? So you actually want the right side of the pad of your index finger to contact the deck. So over here, right? And the reason why it's not at the center or on the left side is because there's actually a chance for the cards to get caught on the index finger, okay? So I place the cards on the right side, so then only needs to clear this much flesh, right? If I place it on the center or on the left side, there's a chance that it needs to clear this much flesh and then it gets caught on the rest of my index finger. I don't want that. So if I place it on the right side, it just needs to slide off just a smidget, so then I could just do the rest of the bottom palm normally, okay? So right side of the index finger is extremely important, okay? So once you have this proper position, your left thumb goes on top of the deck, laying across of the deck above the center line, as per usual, right? Now you're gonna slightly straighten out your index finger. So you realize that's now curled in, right? I'm actually gonna slightly straighten out and apply a bit of pressure with the pad of my index finger, right? So it's gonna slightly straighten out. And what this allows the deck to do is to actually buckles these bottom cards, right? So rather than doing a pinky pull down, I just buckle these couple of cards, and now I can spot the 4 cards that I want to palm, right? Or the 3 cards, or the 2 cards, or the 1 card only, okay? So buckling the cards, in my opinion, is actually a lot faster, right? So that's why I actually prefer buckling these cards, because I don't have to like count 4 cards or whatever. I can just buckle them, feel out 4 cards, and that's it, okay? So I can just insert my pinky into the buckle, and then I have my pinky break, right? But if you do want to do a pinky pull down, there's nothing wrong with that. I just personally preferring buckling the cards because my index finger is already there. I could just apply a bit of pressure and then voila, my pinky break. Now, much like the Curry bottom palm, you're going to insert your pinky deep into the break until the phalange of your pinky actually starts to contact these buckled cards, okay? And you're going to start to apply a bit more pressure until you get that U shape once more, okay? But because this top right corner is just barely contacting this index finger, the moment you buckle these cards, it actually slips off, right? So you can tell that the top right corner is actually slipping away from my index finger, like so. Now you're going to do 2 things at once. Your pinky is going to pull on the buckled cards, causing them to rotate around the fat of your thumb. The second thing that we're going to do is that you're going to apply just the slightest bit of pressure on the deck with your thumb, causing it to lift up and be clipped in between of your index finger and your thumb, okay? And it's going to remain clipped in between of those 2 fingers for the rest of the move, okay? Next, as you continue to pivot these buckled cards, you're going to relax your middle finger and your ring finger, causing them to extend a bit. Okay? And now you're going to continue just swiveling these cards by pulling down on the buckled cards with your pinky finger. These cards are just going to continue swiveling. And as you do so, your middle finger is actually just going to ride on top of this top right corner. So just going to rotate around it, right, next to the index finger, like so. Okay? Now, you're going to slowly release pressure with your pinky finger, and you're also going to slowly apply pressure with your middle finger, okay? Much like the Paul Curry bottom palm. And now, this causes these cards to actually be buckled into your palm and be put into a modified classic palm, like so, okay? Now, your left ring and pinky finger are just going to move around, and then they're just going to join underneath of the middle finger in a classic palm, like so. Okay? So that's the Ernest Earick bottom palm, alright? So now you can either have this card in a normal classic palm, or you can leave it like there, or you can just do whatever that you want with it, okay? So underneath the cover of the deck, what you have is this, right? You move your index finger, right? The right side of the pad of your index finger contacts the top right corner. It straightens out and applies a slight bit of pressure, causing these cards to actually just buckle. You insert your pinky above of the cards that you want to buckle, right? That you want to palm, sorry. You release pressure with your index, causing these cards to unbuckle, like so, right? You're then going to start pushing down on these cards with your pinky, causing these cards to bend in a U shape, right? This causes this corner to actually just slip off of the index finger, right? Which means that now the palm has started, right? Now you can lift up on the deck, right, with your thumb. You're going to continue swiveling these cards until you can relax your middle finger and your ring finger, causing them to extend and straighten out. You're going to continue rotating these cards, right, along of the fat of your thumb. These cards are just going to rotate until your middle finger is just going to ride on top of this top right corner to join underneath of the index finger, like so. And now the rest of your finger is actually just join the middle finger, all right? It's just going to ride on top of this top right corner as well, join underneath of the middle finger, and then you just curl in as well, and now you have a classic palm, just like so, okay? So that is the Ernest Earick bottom palm, okay? Now, here's a couple of tips regarding this move. This move is not going to be easy, all right? But stretching your pinky will actually make the move 90% easier. So I highly recommend that you stretch your pinky. This will allow your pinky to actually do most of the move without needing any sort of weird fidgeting with other fingers, right? Because I know for some people they actually do they do weird finger crawlings just to help this packet move into proper positioning, but that's actually not necessary if you have your pinky fully stretched out and you could just easily just bottom palm them, right? So just the pinky alone should give you the necessary rotation for the move, and that can only be attained if you can independently bend your pinky. So stretching your pinky is extremely important. The other tip is that if you practice this move with actually more cards, it will actually be easier. The move will actually feel really weird and the card will bend way too easily if you're actually just doing this move with one card. Okay, so when you're first starting off, it's actually easier to actually just palm with maybe 4 or more cards. So yeah, because then it just feels a bit more solid. If you're doing it with one card, it's actually a very bizarre sensation. But if you actually do it with one card, it actually feels way nicer for some reason. So doing the move with, practicing the move with 4 cards actually makes it easier. So I highly recommend that you practice this move with 4 cards. Okay. The third tip that I have is that there's actually a chance for the top left corner of the buckled cards to flash when you execute the move. So when you execute the move, there's actually a chance for these cards to actually just flash over here, right? You can see it over here. It actually starts to leak a bit over here, right? If you're afraid of that, Ernest Earick actually recommends that you actually bevel the deck forward, right? So you have your standard dealer's grip, right? You have your standard dealer's grip adjusted for palming, and you actually just kick the deck forward like so. So now you have this slant like so, all right? Which means that when you execute the bottom palm now, because of this slope, the top few cards will actually hide this top left corner, okay? So now you can execute the bottom palm as per usual, okay? So those are just the 3 tips regarding the one hand bottom palm. So 1 is just stretching your fingers, right? 2 is just practicing with more cards because then it'll feel a bit more solid and more stable. The third tip is that you can you can bevel the deck forward, so that it's going to be easier to hide this top left corner in case it flashes, okay? Now let's go over the left one hand bottom palm, which was published in Stars of Magic Series 7 number 1 by Dr. Jacob Daley. This was actually used in an effect called Cards Up the Sleeve. And this bottom palm, which you probably don't really think about, is that it's actually done from a small packet. So in the context of the effect that Dr. Jacob Daley actually does, he would actually do a false count, and then he would actually just square up the cards, but as he squares up the cards, he will actually get a heel break above of the cards that he wants to palm. So he has the, so in this case, I have 4 indifferent cards and then the 4 aces. So I would have a heel break above of the 4 aces, like so, okay? Next, I'm actually going to move my index finger to the right long edge of the packet, like so, much like the Paul Curry one. Now I'm going to relax my left ring finger and my left pinky to actually allow this heel break to actually just pop up along the entire back end like so. So now I have this massive gap in between of the top indifferent cards and then of the aces like so, okay? Next, I'm actually going to slip my left ring finger into the gap, and just like with the other one-handed bottom palms, I'm actually just going to slip it in deeper into the gap until it presses against the phalange on my ring finger like so, and then I can just continue until it buckles these cards, okay? So I just buckle these cards like so, okay? Now what's going to happen is that I'm actually just going to further bend my index finger, which causes these cards to actually just start rotating around of the fat of my thumb, okay? So now these cards start rotating, and again, much like with the other one-hand bottom palms, I'm just going to relax my middle finger, and I'm just going to allow it to just ride along with the rotating buckled cards like so, okay? Next, once this top left corner is actually in line with my index finger, I'm actually just going to apply a bit of pressure with my index finger as I release pressure with my ring finger. So now I can just palm this card. So now this packet just gets put into a modified classic palm that's very similar to the one that Paul Curry does, okay? So now that I have this in this position, I can then move my other fingers around, join the index finger underneath the index finger along of the short edge, and apply a bit of pressure, and that's how I get a bottom palm with a small packet of cards, okay? Now, if you're not a big fan of learning a completely different like finger positioning, and then you have to like move your index over here, an easy solution is just use the Ernest Earick mechanics with this move. Like, just use the Ernest Earick mechanic with a smaller packet, and it'll function the exact same way. So if I have a pinky break right above the cards I want to palm, move my index to the top right corner, buckle these cards, and then I can just swivel it into position. Okay? So if you really don't like this move, you can just use the normal Ernest Earick mechanics, but the method with the heel break and the ring finger are how Dr. Jacob Daley originally did this move. Okay? But again, doing it with the Ernest Earick method is possible as well. Okay? Now, if you want to palm all the cards in a small packet except the top card, it's going to be a lot easier, okay? I don't know why you would do it, but it is an option. Maybe you want to ditch some cards or whatever, but if you have a 4-card packet, you would palm 3 cards, leaving with only 1. If you have 6 cards, you would palm 5, leaving you only with 1. You can even do it with a double if you want, but I'm actually going to do it with the 4 aces and 1 indifferent card, alright? So you don't need to get any breaks in this instance. All you need to do is to get in the proper grip. So your index is at the top right corner of the deck as per usual. Your thumb is lying on top of the deck on the above of the center line of the cards, right? But basically what you're going to do is that you're going to move the top card forward by dragging it forward with just friction. So the top card is actually just going to get dragged forward with my palm, with my thumb, right? So I'm just going to scooch it over with my palm, with my thumb, right? Next, the other cards underneath of this top card actually just gonna get pulled down with my pinky. So now it just swivels around the fat of my thumb, right? And then from there, I can just do a normal Ernest Earick bottom palm like so, okay? And now I don't even need to do a pinky break to bottom palm the few cards that I need to bottom palm, right? Now I just have 1 card left and I palm the 4 aces, okay? So this is a lot simpler than doing it with a small packet because I'm stealing everything underneath of it. But yes, so I'm basically just moving everything up and just bottom palming the rest of the cards. Okay, so that's just a small little thing that you can do. So in Paul Curry's book, he actually suggests a whole bunch of different covering actions coupled with dropping the left arm to your side. One is that as you're dropping the left arm to your side, you would then bottom palm the cards, right? And then your right hand would store something in your pockets, right? And then you don't find it, right? So you're patting around, oh, I don't find it, right? You would then raise your left arm back up. So by then you would already have palmed the cards. You would then pass the cards to your right hand in a right hand billow grip, and your left arm would then search around the pockets, right? And as it goes to search around the pockets, your left hand would then deposit the cards in one of the pockets, and then it would then pull out the necessary item that you're looking for. So whether that be like a marker, a rubber band, or a coin, okay? The next covering action that Paul Curry actually suggests is that if you have the cards already bottom palmed, you would then toss the cards onto the table with your left hand. Just make sure they don't flash the palm cards, right? Your right hand then does something else, right? It can gesture to the cards to tell the spectator to shuffle them, or it can push something else aside, etc. But then your left hand just drops off to your side with the palm cards, okay? So that's another covering action that Paul Curry suggests, okay? Ernest Earick, on the other hand, suggests something that's a bit more interesting. It's interesting. So after he did his one hand bottom palm, he would then put the middle finger up against the right long edge of the deck and then tuck the thumb underneath of the deck, okay? He would then push upwards with the thumb, causing the deck to actually just flip face up and be pinched in between of the middle finger and the thumb, like so, okay? Which would actually cause the cards to actually be smeared a bit, which would then give the excuse for his right hand to come over. His left hand would then release the deck, and then he would move underneath the deck to square up the deck, all right? And then your left hand with the palm cards can then just do whatever it wants, right? Your left hand can then drop off the side, can deposit elsewhere, and then your right hand in the billow grip can just place it down somewhere else, okay? So that's the main difference between, those are the three covering actions that both Paul Curry and Ernest Earick actually recommends, okay? Ernest Earick with a interesting just mechanic like so, okay? Now the angles for this move are actually pretty good. Honestly, I think as far as angles go, it's probably the most comparable to the diagonal palm shift, so the DPS. Every angle except the right, and obviously the back, right, is good, right? Because then that's where you see the mechanics of the move, right? So remember what I said in my classic palm video, right? As long as the area in your middle finger, like from your middle finger onwards, right, is hitting the eyesight of the spectator, like so. So I'll demonstrate. So as long as this part is hitting the spectator, it won't matter. You won't flash the classic palm like so, even though from underneath this is what it looks like, okay? So as long as the middle finger and upwards is the part that's hitting the line of sight of the spectator, you won't flash the classic palm, okay? And the fact that you're doing this move with a deck on top of everything means that you even have more cover, okay? So genuinely, the angles for this palm are extremely good, as long as you don't go like, oh yeah, look at this, right? Look at how I'm doing the move, right? So as long as you don't do this, the angles for the move are very, very good. And also, just as another thing, when you do the palm, when you're dropping the hand off the side, you're actually giving the move its optimal angle, because you're actually straightening out your wrist, which automatically gives the spectator the left side view of the deck, which is a phenomenal angle for the move, right? It's the same thing with the DPS, right? So if you couple that with the hand drop, it makes for like the best circumstances for the execution of this move, right? So if you just move your, whoops, these cards are far too bent. But if you just straighten out your wrist, right? Drop your hand off to the side, they won't see it, right? So that is why the angles of this move are just so good, okay? Now, if you're interested in reading more about one hand bottom palms, there are a lot of resources regarding this move, right? So there's Card Monster by Richard Hucko, written by Jeremiah Zoom. There's Randolph Palm by Z. That's a very interesting bottom palm that sort of happens underneath of a spread. So it's a very, very nice move. There's the One Hand Bottom Palm by Ben Earl. That's a modified sort of Ernest Earick handling, but also its own thing as well. There's Worlds Beyond by Paul Curry, which covers the One Hand Bottom Palm that I covered earlier on in this video. By Forces Unseen by Ernest Earick, written by Stephen Minch. That's again the bottom palm that I covered in this video, but again, it's put in the context of Bureau d'échange of the effect. There's the Classic Magic of Larry Jennings by Larry Jennings. That's where the weird one-hand bottom palm comes from, which I actually can do, and I modified it a bit, but it's there, and it's very mechanically satisfying as well. There's the Complete Workers by Michael Close, which is actually a center palm, but it's largely rooted in the same mechanics as the classic as the one-hand bottom palm that's written in the Classic Magic of Larry Jennings. So those are all resources that you can take a look at. And that's the one-hand bottom palm, one of my favorite moves. It's definitely not an easy move, and I have a feeling that a lot of you will not stretch your pinkies, but stretching your pinkies will help a lot. And believe me, sometimes to make magic work, you have to do non-magic related things. So I highly recommend that you stretch your pinkies, because it will make a world of difference regarding this move, okay? But even if you do stretch your pinkies, it is going to be a long journey ahead, because it is going to be a difficult move regardless, especially if you're not used to it. But I think once you get used to this one feeling of just pulling on these couple of cards, it's gonna be a blast once you get past that. So I think that you guys are gonna enjoy this move, and I think that you guys are gonna have a lot of pain, but also a lot of fun nailing down this move. And so yeah, I hope that you guys treat this move well, and you guys use this move a whole lot as well, because I know I used a lot out of this move, and I still do, honestly. But yeah, I think that about wraps it up for this one. Yeah, stay safe, stay healthy, and yes, see you guys next time.